All right. I just, man, I just, I just finished doing 20 minutes on why Davis Mills should be benched. And at the very end, I said, "Hey, by the time I'm done doing this, it might have been announced already." And it turns out, yeah, it was announced already. You sons of bitches. I'm gonna tweet this out that emergency YouTube emergency stream. Well, we're positive right now. Let's see, youtube.com/SethPayne91. There we go. Emergency stream, Mills benched, and we will just go ahead and link it somehow, you sons of bitches. Okay, talk to me, everybody. Talk to me and tell me where you were when you found out that Davis Mills had been benched and how you were feeling about it. Personally, I am super cool with it because I think that this is exactly what needed to happen. This is like we're at the point now. We're at the point now where Davis Mills is not going to get any better, and in fact, I think that pick six was emblematic of, I think, how a lot of defenses are starting to see Davis Mills. That pick six looked very much like the defensive back Fuller, not Kyle Fuller, but the younger brother. Fuller knew that there was no risk of a double move. I think the tendencies, both from Davis Mills with his footwork, with his eyes, with everything else, let that guy with just one safety over the top and not a whole lot of reason to, and not like over him, just playing single high. He jumped that route like he knew it was coming. And I think that was an indication in a lot of ways that teams have over a half season's worth of film on Mills right now. He's regressing in a lot of ways, and he's also he's developing some tendencies. The emergency, Clayton saying, yeah, the emergency update on my live stream. This is the damn thing. This is the thing. I did 20 minutes. I had this all laid out for why you should be in favor of Mills. In favor of Mills being benched, and it was all for naught. I think that maybe Lovie Smith was watching it, but it was actually reported by so Mike Garafolo reported that it'll be Kyle Allen for the Texans at QB Sunday. Sources say Lovie Smith declined to make a starter in his press conference today. That was the conflicting report because, as DJ Bieneme reported, for what it's worth, Texans offensive coordinator Pep Hamilton says no change in regard to who's starting at quarterback this week. So in my live stream, what I had said was I will give Nick Caserio and everybody else involved a big old a pat on the back and a moral victory if they kept this quiet till Friday. And I don't. Frankly, I don't know why they even bother trying. The Panthers announced theirs yesterday that they were going with Sam Darnold. And the thinking, I think, is you wait as long as possible until the Dolphins, I know it sounds ridiculous. Like, oh, this will be the edge. This will somehow be what puts you over the top and helps you beat Tua Tagovailoa and Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Okay, I get it. It sounds silly, but it's every little bit. I think you get into the habit of trying to seek out every little edge, and if there is going to be an upset, maybe that'll help a little bit. I don't know, though, how much Miami's defense is going to change based on either Kyle Allen or Davis Mills. They will be able to go back and kind of review film from his last starts and figure out what he likes, what he doesn't like, what the Texans are likely to do because of it. I think we know what the Texans are going to do. They're going to try to run the ball a lot. The Dolphins have a good run defense. I think it's even better than the stats would show just because of some of the game situations they've been in. But they really hemmed up Chubb the other day really well. Chubb ended up having a respectable outing in terms of yards per carry, but when the game really mattered, when it was still close, he was at like 2 yards per carry or less. So I think that right there, more than anything, is why I want to see I would like to see Dameon Pierce have more of a chance. And Davis Mills may or may not develop into a good quarterback. Look, it took Geno Smith a decade to become a good quarterback. He's the favorite for comeback player of the year right now. And I don't even know what he's coming back from. He's never actually, to be a comeback, you have to come back to where you once were. And Geno's never had a season like he's had right now. He's on pace. He's already obliterated some of his all-time season highs, and we still have multiple games left to play. So, yes, Davis Mills might develop into a good quarterback someday. What I said on the live stream, as apparently Davis Mills was being benched, and I didn't know it, was that there is a lot to be learned by sitting on the sideline. Ryan Fitzpatrick, when he was benched for Ryan Mallett. Ryan Fitzpatrick was benched for Ryan Mallett. And Ryan Fitzpatrick said that sitting on the sideline and watching Ryan Mallett operate that New England offense that he had some familiarity with, that Fitzpatrick learned about how that offense is supposed to operate. And I think Davis Mills, he's done this before. He did it his rookie year when he ended up, sitting out, came back, looked a lot better versus weaker defenses too. And I think that could happen now. I don't think it changes one thing about who the Texans are going to take in the draft. I think the Texans, regardless of Davis Mills staying or, as a starter for the rest of the season or not, the Texans were going to take somebody in the draft. And that doesn't mean that Davis Mills can't stick around and keep developing. And we've seen this before with various quarterbacks. You draft a new guy, Drew Brees. Drew Brees was replaced and eventually ended up becoming Drew Brees, and that was that was an even murkier situation, really, given how Drew Brees had performed up to that time. But right now, the nonsense that was said in New York about Zach Wilson, one of the arguments was that, well, if you bench Zach Wilson now, you might never get him back, which is absurd because anybody who's got the fortitude to be an NFL quarterback should never be so discouraged by one benching in his second season that he's ruined forever and you might never get him back. He's Zach Wilson. He'll learn from it. I'm saying he's Zach Wilson. You don't have to treat him with kid gloves or like he's a prince or something. He's just this guy that got drafted in the first round. So let's see. What are the Texans? Metal Pigeon says, what are the Texans coaching still saying in the press conference that there's no QB change? What's the point of saying that? Okay, so I think you just joined. Metal Pigeon, what I was saying was I think that the theory is you hold on and wait as long as possible. There's going to be a leak at some point. Oh, I'll pat myself on the back for this, though, because what I figured this morning was this is how it works. The team will be informed of it, obviously, at the latest when Kyle Allen starts taking snaps in practice. They were probably told right before they go out, and maybe the quarterbacks were told a certain amount of time ahead, and then everybody else was. And then everybody gets out on the field, so obviously nobody's texting we're out on the field. And then as soon as they get back to their lockers, they're texting their agents or they're texting their buddy who's friends with their agent or something like that. Then an agent hears or maybe even one of the quarterback's agents themselves come up and say something. It's all they're trying to wait until the last possible moment to give the Dolphins as little time as possible to get ahead of it. So the Dolphins, the way it works, the team is the coaches are working on a Tuesday in game planning. Then they install the first part of the game plan on Wednesdays. So this does theoretically, it'd be one thing if you were going from a super athlete to an old stodgy old school type quarterback or something. But that's not what we have here. Like Davis Mills, 4.58 40 time, notwithstanding, he's not the most fleet of foot. I think Kyle Allen's a pretty good athlete, kind of like Davis Mills. He's a good enough athlete. He's not fast by today's standards, but he's certainly, faster than the old school Jim Kellys of the world and everything. So I don't think it changes things too much. It's just a matter of competitive advantage. This is the kind of thing that I could see Nick Caserio totally just saying, hey, this is this is the way we're going to operate moving forward. We always do this kind of stuff. We're just going to try to keep things quiet. Caserio takes these things pretty I don't want to say casually. I think he's learned over the last year. I've heard anecdotally that it was kind of a shock to him at times when how quickly news and information got out. And then the funny thing, this is when he was first GM, and like Belichick's had 20 years up there in New England to forge an airtight, super sealed Al Capone vault of information, so people don't, news probably doesn't get out there as quickly. If Caserio has time here, we could be a super psychotic and paranoid organization that's widely regarded as somehow so good that they must be cheating. It's what we need. It's what we need. It's what we want. We've been toughened to it because of the Astros. We've already learned how to ignore, if not embrace, all the noise of the cheating accusations. So someday we might actually get there. You can see there, Texans cap. I follow a lot. He's the cap and trade guy. So I think for now, the only questions I would have, like, let's see what Davis Mills is. Benched. That's a good graphic. I might steal that. Look, Davis Mills, his neck's not that long. We've gone over this. That was a fluke of the angle there. Kyle Allen will receive first team reps today, paving the way for a start. A rough fall from grace for Davis Mills. Come on, Ian Rapp. Stop it. Just stop it. A rough fall from grace. Don't be so dramatic about this. Ivan Rodriguez says, if it happens, is this actually a good thing if we want the first overall pick? Okay. I'm not overly concerned about getting the first overall pick. I think it's probably a bad thing if you really, really, really want the first overall pick because look, Davis Mills, I think, was going to keep getting worse. I think teams are starting to get a beat on him. There's a certain predictability there that's not all Pep Hamilton's fault. A lot of it is just Davis Mills has his limitations. He has his tendencies. He stares down receivers. He holds onto the ball a beat too late as he's also still getting rid of it quickly. It's the weirdest thing to watch, and I'm sick of it. But I think that ultimately they probably have a better chance of winning with Kyle Allen versus the lesser opponents. Because for one, he throws interceptions. Kyle Allen throws interceptions the same way Davis Mills throws interceptions. I think that some of the more egregious errors might not be as bad, but I think you're also going to move the chains more and just flat out not get shut to 5 yards of offense in the first half. It could totally happen. I just don't think it's as likely with Kyle Allen. And then there's just the old spark. To delve into cliches, this might be a spark that gets either Brandon Cooks going. I mean, you look at what was going on in New York, and with Zach Wilson getting benched, I think people can fairly argue that he got a bit of a raw deal given some of the defenses that he's faced between the Patriots, the Broncos, and other couple stud defenses. It's hard for a young quarterback. This isn't even his second full season to deal with all of that. But the fact that Elijah Moore and those guys, the receiving core in general, were so miserable. Here, let's do this. Let's watch this little tidbit because this is fun. This is a little montage of the Jets press conferences from this week where you started to get a feel for, like, all right, this is not exactly what they're probably envisioning or wanting here. Let's see. You guys probably can't hear that, can you? The problem with rooting for the first overall pick is now your only option is hoping Allen is less watchable than Mills. Can't we just root for decent football? Look, KR, listen, this is what I agree with. I think that the Texans, because of their upcoming schedule, are actually in a pretty good position to have more watchable football, but still probably lose these games. And I'm not saying that to be overly negative or pessimistic or anything. They have a tough slot. They're playing the Chiefs. They're playing the Titans. They're playing the Dolphins this week. They face the Jaguars, but the Texans have a two-game cushion on on this first overall pick. So I think that you're safe that you're gonna get a pretty damn good pick. The other part about hoping and wishing for the first overall pick, and I just went over this in the my live stream where I actually just I talked for like 10 minutes past when this was announced because I can't multitask, everybody. So if you look at just by way of example, we do this every year. We convince ourselves that, like, well, obviously, Bryce Young is obviously the number one overall pick. Or C.J. Stroud, how could you go wrong? It's so obvious. You remember what a generational pick Trevor Lawrence was? But just going back to 2020, okay, if you missed out on Joe Burrow, if you couldn't be the hapless Bengals, you were stuck with Tua, Justin Herbert, possibly Jordan Love, or Jalen Hurts in the second round. In 2019, oh, great, we missed out on Kyler Murray. Oh, no, our world is falling upside down. But you got Daniel Jones, who, I don't know, that's a depressing argument right there. That's like arguing about the two most boring girlfriends you've had. 2018, Baker Mayfield, number one overall. He won a Heisman, right? Yeah, Sam Darnold after him, and then Josh Allen, the lowly, pathetic Josh Allen, and 2 spots after that, the just MVP winning Lamar Jackson. Those are your choices after number one overall. 2017, Mitch Trubisky, Pat Mahomes, Deshaun Watson. So I don't get overly hung up on this. I'm more. And look, I played on a team that had a number one overall pick at quarterback, and I like David Carr a lot. David himself has talked about how he was not a number one overall caliber quarterback, at least not what you hope to get, obviously, out of that. So I like the fact that there's a very good chance they have 2 top 10 picks because of the pick from the Browns. The Browns is the other one, and when we're talking about likelihood of winning or not, obviously it helps you if you beat the Browns because their pick moves up. But if it moves you down against other teams in the first round, I don't know. I don't want to overthink all that part of it. I think the biggest thing is more watchable football, hopefully. And then aside from watchable football, you also hopefully, take it easier on Dameon Pierce, because Dameon Pierce has started to very much become the focus of what other defenses are concerned about. And this doesn't mean that they're calling run blitzes or that they're always stacking 8 in the box. There is a psychological approach to a game. When you face a team like the Texans, I'll tell you, I guarantee you that most defenses facing the Texans have been saying, look, we got to stop Dameon Pierce. That's the deal. We got to stop Dameon Pierce. If Davis Mills beats us, then shame on us. But our focus is, like, emotionally, with your anger, all of that, it's to get to Dameon Pierce, and he's the kind of guy that you got to have 7-8 bodies on to bring him down. Every single one of the teams since the Jacksonville game has showed that Jacksonville run where Dameon Pierce broke like more tackles in a single play than a lot of running backs do than David Johnson did in an entire season. So he is the focus, and he's also the hope for the future right now. I think some of the run game is suffering, not just because teams aren't concerned about the passing game, but also because the operation with a veteran quarterback is just better in general at times. The run game, works in concert with the passing game, but the quarterback is also in charge of checking into the right runs, being sure that the communication is proper, and hopefully that gets better. It's not guaranteed, but hopefully it does. Scott Fizzer says he follows all the same folks on Twitter. Metal Pigeon says, I'm just hoping. Here we go. That's it. Okay, so KR says the problem with rooting for the first overall pick is now your only option is hoping Allen is less watchable than Mills. Can't wait. Okay, that was the one that I already read. Yeah, I agree with you, man. And then Metal Pigeon, I'm just hoping the teams who are threatening us for the number one pick stumble onto some wins themselves. I think they will. Let me plug my computer in here, everybody. This has been a day of many surprises. It's been a day of, and I think I fixed my audio. Multitasking is my new thing. Here we go. So this is the Jets. Just to give you a feel for like what it's been like for the Jets. This is Zach Wilson, all right? Take a quarterback high. Everything's going to be awesome, right? So this was earlier this week, obviously. So, no audio still, huh? Sorry, Clayton. Thanks, Clayton. All right. So that's the Jets. Screw them. No, I had that pulled up, so I wanted to play it. I'm excited about this. Like, honestly, at this point, I'm trying to tell all of you guys that you can release yourselves from. You guys can release yourselves from worry. we need a film breakdown of Roy Lopez. That's actually a good idea. Because I was excited about Roy, but some things have changed a little bit, and understandably so. But I'm excited to, you know what, see Kyle Allen. I think that if there's one thing I learned about Pep so far this year, he actually is pretty good at scheming up a surprise or two with new personnel. Usually it's in the form of a tight end. Like we'll have a new tight end. It's happened with almost from O.J. Howard on down the line. Every time a new tight end comes into the game, he figures out a way to get this guy a touchdown. Tegan Toriano, first time he came in. So with Kyle Allen, perhaps there will be a little bit of something special to at least spark some offense. The spread right now for the Dolphins game is 11.5, or at least it was this morning. That honestly seems low. I think it's a combination of the Texans playing pretty adequate bend but don't break defense, and they've been acceptable in the red zone in as a passing defense. So if you look at the Dolphins and what their true strength is, obviously it's those receivers. I think that people probably think the odds makers think it might be a closer game than people expect. Not that I'm not giving gambling advice on here or anything, but yeah, let's see. Because Jordan Akins came back and he did some impressive stuff. Tegan Toriano. Maybe they reactivate Brevin Jordan just for the surprise element this week. But I think they might have a little something in store that doesn't get them an illegal procedure penalty or something. And you know, that's another thing about Davis Mills that, like, just by way of illustration, so you guys know, it had gotten bad. Like, there's resetting and tanking. Even though, and this is the frustrating thing, I don't think that the plan was to tank this bad. I don't think the plan was to only win one game. It's like I can sense that the Texans didn't brace themselves for that. And I'm talking about coaching and management, because you know, they wouldn't have spent some of the money they did on veteran players. You know, I don't think they bring in a Jerry Hughes. I don't think they re-sign a Malik Collins necessarily, because those guys are short-term purchases that should make you more competitive. And if you're genuinely trying to tank, they shouldn't do that. So I think these guys were a little surprised by just how bad they were. But maybe also they wanted to see how good Davis Mills was. This is where they are. They're 32nd in total offense, 34th, that's yardage, 31st in total points scored. They're 32nd in yards gained, that's total offense, 31st in offensive plays run. That means the defense ends up being out there a lot. That's partly their fault because they're a bend but don't break defense. 29th in red zone touchdown percentage. That one's disappointing because they had actually been competent at that early in the season, and then the dam started to break. So I guess I got to update my red zone touchdown percentage, because unless that's a different stat than the one I was looking at, the best thing we do just on this long list of negatives that I've seen offensively is that they're 26th in total turnovers, despite being 31st in interceptions per game, because that was I guess they just don't fumble a lot. So good for you. But they're also not running that many plays. So I think that Mills, for one, if you can learn anything as he's sitting on the sideline, I think he's going to hopefully have to learn to be more aggressive. And I don't mean that he's got to be Brett Favre or just, gunning it recklessly. But Kyle Allen is, not an awesome quarterback. I don't think he's going to be an awesome quarterback, but I think that he can do some things that make the offense operate the way it should, and look a little bit more smooth. And ultimately, maybe Davis Mills starts a few games next year before the rookie comes in, but we'll see. Let's see. I'm tweeting Coach Payton that I have the original crawfish cookbook, and I'm willing to drive a U-Haul across I-10 for him to consider coaching the Texans next season. Oh, boy. Okay. All right. There's the whole other question is who's going to coach this team next year if it's not Lovie Smith. I think locally, a lot of us have felt like, all right, given all of the drama, given the lawsuit, given all these other things that are happening that happened with the Texans hire, that there's no way that the Texans would fire another coach after 1 year. Enough people outside of Houston that are pretty plugged in are starting to predict and forecast that I have my doubts and reservations. And I've heard things that I just never. You guys that listen to my radio show know that I'm very skeptical of the gossip that I hear. Like I would be a horrible reporter. I would never break stories because I've seen it from the players' side. Like I've seen things reported about either myself or guys that I know that I know aren't true. But it doesn't mean that the reporters are lying. It means that somebody in the organization feeds the reporter information. And so I've heard noise and I've heard chatter, but it doesn't feel like anything that is likely to me right now. I think that Lovie Smith gets 1 more year. That's how I feel right now. That's just my gut feeling. And I know that Lovie Smith very much impressed the McNair family, and I think that after going through an ordeal where they might not have felt like they trusted the right people, whether that's Jack Easterby, Bill O'Brien, whomever. I'm not even getting into that old drama, but I think they might feel like if I put myself in their shoes, I'm thinking like, okay, I got to really reevaluate like who here genuinely is doing things the way that they've told me they want to do them, and are they doing them for whatever that's worth. I think Lovie is that guy. I don't think there's a whole lot of subterfuge or there's no like Machiavellian side to Lovie Smith. And you could argue that about his defense. There's no Machiavellian to his defense. There's not enough subterfuge and deception. But Lovie Smith as a person I think he's going to shoot it straight and tell you how he feels. So I don't know if it matters or if I worry about it. Other than that, if he's here for 1 more year, then that probably sets you back 1 more year with whoever's working with your quarterback. So if they draft a quarterback, I'm hopeful that they would reset the coach. I'm just trying to tell you how I see it and how I think it'll happen. I think he gets 1 more year. I could very well be wrong. I would prefer for them to get somebody then coming in that either A is an offensive mind or B, in the case of a DeMeco Ryans, if you want to talk about a defensive-minded coach, but who has spent like 2/3 of his career in a Shanahan / Kubiak / McVay type of offense or team, that's like he's got a whole lot of experience with that offense and how it operates and with guys who have coached in that offense. So I would trust DeMeco Ryans to do a pretty good job with that. I think he's a more, you see him and you can tell that he's a player's coach in a lot of ways, but he's not like a Robert Saleh player's coach. I think he's a more cerebral guy. Not that like Saleh's plenty bright, but I think like DeMeco is more like I could tell when he was a rookie. DeMeco is a guy who's kind of methodical and thinks things through and is like a deep thinker about stuff. Like he's just from the time he was a young guy, he was very mature about things. So that's where I am on that. I think. Is there anybody? So Scott, to get back to your question or your comment. Okay, Sean Payton. How would we feel about Sean Payton? Because he's integrally tied to the whole Miami situation that sparked the lawsuit by Brian Flores that includes the Houston Texans for unfair interviewing and hiring practices. I don't know how much that situation is really going to hold the Texans back. I do wonder where, if Sean Payton had his dream scenario in Miami, or at least what he wanted at that point, I'm guessing he's always figured that Dallas is the backup. And, lo and behold, Mike McCarthy's looking like a potential coach of the year candidate this year. So I don't think it's going to end up being the Cowboys, because unless the Cowboys collapse in the playoffs, would Sean Payton consider coming back here? I think he might, and I think that comes down to what's his relationship. Is Caserio going to hire Sean Payton? And in a weird way, if you wanted to, you could tie that back to New England via the Parcells tree. It would be a guy that I'm guessing, because all those guys, they approach football kind of a similar way. I know the Belichick disciples are different than the Parcells disciples, but I played for Coughlin, who's on that Parcells tree. There's some common themes there. There's a certain cutthroat mentality, not in a bad way either, but just in a you're going to bleed and suffer and get the job done no matter what it takes. There's a certain element there that I think that Caserio and Peyton could probably get along real well on. So, yeah, that's a possibility. I think it could happen. Let's see. The can Lovie adjust his defense discussion sounds depressingly like the Aggies can Jimbo change his offense question. You're in a bad spot if you have to ask. Okay, good. That's a good point about Lovie's defense. Now, this is the problem with Lovie's defense, or I guess the problem with evaluating Lovie's defense. Lovie has modernized his defense compared to what it used to be. They don't line up and do nothing but cover two. There have been some games this year where they've played almost exclusively man. There are other games where they've been almost exclusively zone. They still do run a lot of zone. But I think there's also, without getting overly technical about it, there's ways you can run zone that also incorporate a lot of man elements. Like the Jets do that. The Jets run a lot of zone, but in a lot of their zone coverages, they'll still have Sauce Gardner playing one-on-one press man or cover three with a press element to it. So there's different ways to do it, and Lovie is not utilizing Derek Stingley the same way that the Jets are utilizing Sauce Gardner. That's been frustrating. I don't worry as much about the Tampa 2 side of it or anything. I worry about the fact that you get a cornerback these days, or in any era of football, you get a cornerback like that because if he can lock down a receiver, then all of a sudden those 11 other guys have a much smaller bubble to cover. They don't have to worry as much about as much territory. You can rotate your safeties. You can walk a guy up in the box. It just makes everything a lot easier. And the Texans haven't used him that way. That's where I'm a little bit concerned about Lovie and what it would mean for the defense. The only thing is that I think this defense is still similar to what the Bills do. It's similar to what several other teams in the league do that play pretty good defense. It's just if you look at the Bills, okay, well, where we have a Malik Collins, they've got an Ed Oliver who's blossomed into a really good player, or multiple different guys at the levels of the defense. Milano is the linebacker I'm trying to think of. That Matt Milano's that kid's a stud. So if Christian Harris can develop into that guy, which I'm optimistic. I think Christian Harris has done really well the last couple games, and I'm optimistic to see what he can do either by staying in this defense for one more year or with a different guy. I think he's Christian Harris could work out real well on 3-4 or a 4-3. And the big thing about Christian Harris, this is where I'll give Nick Caserio a lot of credit if it ends up working out this way. What's happening in the NFL this year, there's a return to the run game because defenses have gotten so light in the ass that they don't know how the hell to defend the run. So offenses, like the Dolphins, mind you, are lining up with a fullback, and we talked to Nick Caserio about it this morning. The Dolphins are lining up with a fullback and a tailback, and they're running the ball. They're using the fullback, creatively as a receiver too, but then lining them up all over the place as an H-back and whatnot. But it's effective. So a guy like Christian could end up being a really big asset in that. Let's see. Scott says, I think the picks and cap room help a coach like Sean Payton design the team he wants. Yeah, and I think that's another big element that you can get excited about. I'm going to tell you, the cap space really ramps up in 2023 or 2024. It's not as big in 2023 as you might think. But the draft, I've been pessimistic about the development of the draftees or the first and second year players this year, but it's not like a long-term pessimism. It's more of a, hey, Like, why is Jalen Petrie still struggling to tackle? You can work on this. This is something that a guy like Jalen Petrie, even though he's not the ideal size, I suppose, it's either because of him or the coaches aren't stressing it or a combination of the two. But I would like to see Jalen Petrie, because a safety's whole role is to make the defense safer. He's supposed to be a really solid tackler. I would like him to be a better tackler, but I think he's also learning to play true safety for the first time in his career. They didn't really use him like a traditional safety when he was at Baylor. So if we go down like the top 4 rounds of draft picks, which in even getting into the 4th round, it's trickier to nail those picks. You're going to bust on a few of those. But Dameon Pierce is here, so we'll talk about Dameon Pierce a little bit. Derek Stingley Jr., I'm disappointed that we're not getting to watch a Sauce Gardner-like effect right now, but I think that he's got the chance to surpass him or get to his level when used appropriately. I'm a little bit nervous, too, though, that you remember Derek Stingley's knock. One of the big knocks over Sauce Gardner was that Derek Stingley gets injured too much, and we missed him last week with a hamstring injury. Kenyon Green. Okay. Kenyon Green he needs some work. He's got technique issues that he can improve. I think he does physically. He's on the right path. I think he's got to do the classic, like a full year of the offseason and, get in the weight room and all that. I hesitate whenever I say that because he went to A&M. He was playing in the SEC. It's not like they lacked for facilities, strength training opportunities, or good competition. And yet here we are where he's just a little bit too adolescent looking right now. I hope that he comes back next year and has one of these transformations where he looks like a full-grown man. But there are times, and when I do my Tuesdays with Drew Hodgson, former Texans center, if any of you please hit subscribe, watch on Tuesdays. Drew does a really good job of breaking down the offensive line, and he's done a good job of pointing out where Kenyon Green's aggressiveness gets him in trouble. And like as a defensive lineman, when I watch Kenyon Green and I watch him play, he's the kind of player that if he were a veteran, I would struggle with because I think he is genuinely strong and he wants to use that strength. And I was a bull rusher myself, so a lot of times that ends up being kind of a stalemate between the two guys. He needs to learn the balance between when to be aggressive and when to understand, this dude across from me runs 4.75 40 at 315 pounds, and I better account for that because he's getting wiped and dumped and shook a few times too many. And I think he'll get better, kind of like Dwayne Brown and those guys got better over time. So that's where I am with those guys. John Mechie. Obviously, he's what am I going to crush him for not defeating cancer quickly enough? I think John Mechie, the cool thing about John Mechie is that his story is one that suggests he doesn't have an issue overcoming adversity and change. So of any guy to have this challenge of beating cancer and then coming back and playing football, I think that he's going to be a good story, regardless of if he even plays football again or not. This is the kind of kid that, like, numerous times in his life has set out a challenge, met the challenge, moved on to the next challenge. I think that's just kind of the way he's wired. Christian Harris, we talked about already. I'm excited about him. Dameon Pierce, I think Dameon Pierce could end up looking better with two things. One, if Kyle Allen can operate and run the offense more smoothly, if perhaps pre-snap is an issue at all with Davis Mills, checking into the right runs, getting protections right, all of that could help out Dameon Pierce. But the other thing, too, is just simply the focus. People focusing on Dameon Pierce because he's the only one true threat right now on the Texans defense. That's not going to help keep Dameon Pierce healthy. And then the third would be, I guess, Eno Benjamin. I want to see Eno Benjamin out there. He can be used as a receiver over Rex Burkhead. And then I think all of a sudden, the people that are dyed-in-the-wool Davis Mills apologists are going to point to Eno Benjamin and say, well, if Davis had Eno Benjamin, I mean, it's a whole different story. You got Eno Benjamin on the field. It's like having a Wes Welker and a Danny Woodhead all rolled into one. Like a slot receiver, pass catching running back. There you go, off to the races. The guys from last year. So this is Nick Casario's first go around where he started in the third round. Where do we put this? I'm interested in your opinion. You take a quarterback in the third round, you're typically not expecting him to. It's going to be a huge find if he ends up being good. It's rare that a Russell Wilson or somebody of that, or Dak Prescott in the fourth round comes around. So, was Dak third? Was it a stupid pick to take Davis Mills in the third round? Given the Texans and where they were in that moment, in that situation, should they have even bothered, or should they have gone with a veteran quarterback or somebody else? I'm curious about how this is going to be judged if Davis Mills never plays again. Nico Collins, I feel good. He's coming around. Brevin Jordan, I'm disappointed. Brevin Jordan, this is the problem, and this is where I would criticize Nick Caserio in the Brevin Jordan experiment, I suppose. I think we sometimes forget that Brevin Jordan was a fifth-round pick. Because there was so much buzz about him, and because he was so impressive to watch in college, and because he went to the U and all of that, there was a certain cachet to him. It's a cool name too. It's Brevin Jordan. That I think a lot of people had higher hopes than they should have for a fifth-round pick. Sometimes those name brand fifth and sixth round picks are the hardest people to accept reality with. But when you see Brevin Jordan in person, he's 6'3". He's 250 pounds, and I think he probably came back lighter than that this year. I think that it's tough to make a case for him unless he gets really, really good at route running. And I think when he and Brevin Jordan ran into each other, remember when somebody was supposed to be picking somebody and Brevin Jordan ran into Jordan Akins? I'm guessing that was Brevin Jordan's fault. So Davis Mills, to put a bow on this, I think Davis Mills has a chance to play in the NFL. I think that various guys, for one, if he'd gone onto a team that was more ready to actually compete, I mean, look at Mac Jones. Look at Mac Jones this year just with a change of coach and like an extreme change of coach. You go from Josh McDaniels, who I think sucks as a head coach, but he did a hell of a job with Mac Jones last year, and you go to a special teams coordinator and a defensive coordinator trying to pretend they're offensive coordinators. Situation matters. Situation matters a lot. So I think Mac Jones probably ends up at some point looking more like he did last year with a new situation. And I think Davis Mills could too, but there just weren't enough situations where he was making something happen despite the circumstances around him. And he's got to figure out, I think with him, it's really going to be a lot on the mental side. He's almost the opposite of a Framber Valdez, because Framber is so emotional and so passionate in a lot of ways that was what was his undoing back when he used to be. Remember when frambering was a bad word? Like, oh, he's frambering or he's framberizing. That was kind of, he had to learn to even those highs and lows out and do his breathing exercises and work with a sports psychologist and all of that. And that's helped a lot. With Davis Mills, like he needs to be a little bit more like the old Framber. He needs to be a little bit just like, dude, I'd love to see the guy get angry at some point. I'd love to see the guy get super charged up or emotional. Like calm, cool, and collected is good, but he might carry it to an extreme degree because I think sometimes it's actually masking a fear or a hesitancy. And hesitation is not what you want. Hesitation is certainly not what you want out of your NFL quarterback. And I think there's a chance for him. It's just that it's run its course, and it's like it's time now to watch Kyle Allen for a little while, and we'll see. But it's not going to. This Kyle Allen experience isn't going to be something that affects the draft order too much, and I think everything will be just fine. Check out sportsradio610.com or sportsradio610.com's Twitter to subscribe to our podcast. We interviewed Nick Caserio today. You can listen to us in the mornings from 6 to 10. And please subscribe. If this is your first time coming to the stream, we just started up this week. I just started up in the last couple weeks, kind of going every day. So I'm getting really excited about it. I think it's a much more fun way to interact and to do things. I'm like learning video editing and photoshopping and everything. And a lot of times it's going to be just hanging out, but I do it at noon every day on weekdays when I don't have a travel conflict. And it's awesome because it's getting me out of a whole lot of other responsibilities too, because it's work, baby. So I got to work. I can't go to that meeting with that teacher. You got to handle that. All right. Congratulations to everybody that was hoping for this, and condolences to everybody who did not want it to happen. But I predict that the Texans will have a top 2 draft pick, and honestly, I'll be surprised if they're not number 1 overall. And they still get that nice little booty from I shouldn't have used that word, not in the context of Cleveland and everything how we came about this pick. We still have that nice draft pick from the Cleveland Browns, which looks like it'll probably settle in somewhere around a 10 if things go according to what Vegas says. And one last thing, Scott says, I think the picks and cap room help a coach like Peyton design the team. You said that a while ago. My bad. Goodbye, everybody.